6 caregivers had come through that house in 14 months. Every single one left with the same look. Not angry, not exhausted, just quietly undone. The way people look when they've lost an argument they didn't know they were in. Graham Whitmore told himself it was circumstance. A bad run. The wrong people for a difficult household. He hired through the best agencies in Victoria, wrote generous contracts, offered weekends free and a self-contained suite above the garage. He replaced one person with the next the way he replaced a failing subcontractor on a build. Efficiently, without sentiment, already planning the call to the agency before the previous contract was even closed. But the house on Rockland Avenue was not a construction problem. And his daughters were not a failing foundation. They were in fact extraordinary. He saw that sometimes at a distance, the way you notice beauty in a building you've already sold. Nola at 13 read philosophy for amusement and could identify every species of Gary oak on the property by leaf shape alone. Fern, at 9, built elaborate worlds from salvaged materials. Cardboard cities with working drawbridges, suspension bridges from elastic bands and popsicle sticks, a model of the inner harbor she'd constructed across an entire gray February. Their mother had given them those minds. Graham had given them the house, the school fees, the materials. He had not given them enough of himself to know how badly he was failing. The caregivers all said the same things in different words. Nola doesn't respond when spoken to. Fern shuts down for days without explanation. I found my keys inside a locked box inside a drawer. One woman, a former school teacher with 20 years of experience, found her car keys placed in a birdhouse at the far end of the garden. She stood in the rain for 40 minutes. She left her resignation letter under the front door mat and drove away without saying goodbye. Graham read each letter with the same expression he used for construction reports. Noted unfortunate, moving on. What he did not read, or would not, was the pattern underneath all of it. Every act of sabotage was the same question wearing a different costume. Are you staying? Or are you just the next one to leave? Nola had been 11 when their mother, Lisette Arnaud, told Graham she'd accepted a position in Montreal. She said it the way people announce a flight delay. Inconvenient, unavoidable, no one's fault. She would visit every school break. She would call every Sunday. The girls would barely notice the adjustment. The girls noticed everything. Fern asked for 3 weeks whether Mum was coming home for the weekend. Graham said soon the first week, we'll see the second. And nothing at all the third. By Christmas neither girl asked any more. Fern stopped eating dinner at the table. Nola stopped speaking to her teachers. Graham hired the first caregiver in January. By March, that one was gone. By September, the third. He was not a cold man. He was an absent one, which is a quieter kind of cruelty because no one can point directly at it. Then, on a Tuesday in October when rain came sideways off the straight and the oaks were shedding in great bronze sheets, a woman named Anwen Parry arrived at the front gate. She was not a caregiver. She was the new housekeeper, referred through the domestic services agency. And she came with 2 canvas bags, a worn peacoat and a 7-year-old boy named Kai, who held a hardcover sketchbook against his chest the way some children hold stuffed animals, with both arms and complete conviction. Graham met them at the door because his meeting had been moved and he happened to be in the front hall. He looked at the woman, then the boy, then back at the woman. He had not been told about the boy. Anwen Parry looked at him with the patience of someone who had been through this particular moment before. Mrs. Cleary at the agency confirmed it, she said. He's quiet. He won't be a problem. Graham thought of several ways to begin. He chose none of them. Come in, he said. The house was beautiful in the way that well-maintained, expensive things are beautiful without being warm. Crown molding, original fir floors, a staircase that curved up from the entry hall like a question. A kitchen that had been photographed for a renovation magazine and hadn't been properly cooked in since. Not the kind of cooking that leaves smells in the walls. Family photographs on the side table. Nola and Fern as small children, squinting in summer light. A portrait from when Lisette was still here, the 4 of them on the lawn, everyone looking slightly to the left of the camera. Kai stopped in the hallway and looked at the photograph. Those the girls? He asked his mother. Yes, Anwen said. Kai looked at the picture for another moment. Then he opened his sketchbook to a blank page and began drawing. Right there in the front hall, standing up, pencil moving before anyone said another word. From upstairs came a sound Graham recognized. The specific creak of Nola's door opening precisely 2 inches, which meant she was listening without committing to being present. My daughters are upstairs, he said. Nola is 13, Fern is 9. There he stopped. The word he wanted was grieving, but he had not let himself use it yet. They're adjusting. Anwen was hanging her peacoat. She had gray eyes and the kind of stillness that doesn't come from calm so much as from practice. I read the file, she said. The agency provided a file. I asked for one. He studied her. Most people he hired performed either false confidence or false ease. Anwen Parry did neither. She stood in his front hall the way a person stands in a room they are simply going to be in for a while. "They're difficult," he said. "I'm sure they are," she said. "Where would you like me to start?" The first test came that same afternoon. Nola did not slam things or pour liquids on surfaces, she was too precise for that. She used absence the way a sculptor uses negative space, deliberately with full awareness of the effect. She walked into the kitchen while Anwen was reorganizing the pantry, picked up the grocery list from the counter, read it without expression, and placed it face down beside the sink. Then she walked out, no words, no eye contact. A perfect practiced erasure. From the breakfast nook, Kai watched her go. He turned to a new page in his sketchbook. Anwen retrieved the grocery list, turned it face up and continued working. Nola came back 40 minutes later. The list was in exactly the same position. Anwen was wiping down the stovetop with the particular attention of someone who actually notices grime. She did not look up. Nola stood in the doorway for 11 seconds, then she left. On Wednesday, every cleaning cloth in the house disappeared. The mop was gone from the utility closet. The vacuum attachments had been placed inside a pillowcase at the back of the upstairs linen cupboard. The glass cleaner sat inside a Wellington boot by the back door. The dish soap had been replaced on the shelf with an identical bottle filled with water. Anwen spent 25 minutes searching. She did not hurry. She did not mutter. She moved through the house with the same unhurried attention she brought to everything, checking under vanities, behind curtains, inside decorative vases, and she found each missing item one by one and returned it to where it belonged. Fern appeared at the top of the stairs, while Anwen was on her knees checking beneath the bathroom sink. She held a stuffed bear that had been mended so many times it was more patch than original fabric, and she watched Anwen with the watchful lateral attention of a child who wants to observe without being observed. "You looking for something?" Fern asked. Anwen sat back on her heels and looked up. "The sponges," she said. "I found most things, not the sponges." Fern's mouth twitched. "They might be in the flower vases." They were in the flower vases. Anwen found them without commentary, washed them and replaced them. She did not scold, she did not report anything to Graham. She did not ask Fern to apologize. What she did was leave a glass of apple juice on the corner of the kitchen table where Fern usually sat, without mentioning it to anyone. She was folding laundry across the room when Fern came in, spotted the glass, and went very still the way animals go still in new places, deciding whether to trust the quiet. Fern drank the juice. She didn't sit down, but she stood near the window and watched Kai outside on the flagstones, sitting cross-legged with his sketchbook in his lap, drawing the roses along the back fence. "What's he always drawing?" Fern asked. Anwen did not look up from the laundry. "Everything," she said. "Everything?" "Whatever he sees." Fern set the empty glass down very carefully. "That's a lot of things." "It is," Anwen agreed. Fern left. But she left the glass on the counter instead of in the sink, which was one more step toward the kitchen than she'd come before. The third test was Nola's, and it was the most honest one. She came on a Thursday evening when the house was quiet, and Graham was behind his office door. She stood in the kitchen doorway with her arms folded and her jaw set, the posture of someone who has decided to get something over with. "You know you won't last," she said. "No one does." Anwen was chopping carrots. She did not stop. "Maybe not," she said. "The last one made it 6 weeks. The one before lasted 4 months, but she cried in the laundry room twice a week, and eventually it became too much even for her." "That sounds like a hard situation for everyone," Anwen said. Nola's arms tightened across her chest. "You're not going to tell me I'm wrong? You're not going to say you're different?" Anwen set down the knife and turned around. She looked at Nola the way people look at things that are both fragile and sharp, carefully, without flinching. "I'm not going to promise you anything," she said. "Promises are cheap and you've had too many of them. I'm going to get back to dinner now." Nola stared at her. "You can stay if you like," Anwen added, turning back to the counter. "Kai's at the table, he's drawing your garden." Nola didn't move for a long moment, then she said, "It's not my garden." Anwen said nothing. After 10 seconds Nola came into the kitchen. She sat 3 seats away from Kai and did not look at his sketchbook, but she did not leave. What changed everything was not dramatic. It never is with children. It was a drawing. On Friday morning, Fern came downstairs to find a page torn from Kai's sketchbook placed on her side of the breakfast table. He must have left it before she came down. The drawing showed a girl with her hair in 2 braids, sitting at a window. In her arms was something that might have been a stuffed bear, or might have been a small city. The proportions were uncertain, the way children's drawings sometimes are. Outside the window in the sketch there was a bird on a branch. Just a bird, just a branch. No note, no signature, just the drawing. Fern stood over it for a long time, then she picked it up and carried it upstairs. 2 hours later she came back down with her cardboard city, The one she'd been building since March, the one she'd said was finished but kept returning to. She set it on the kitchen table and began attaching a new section. A small garden behind a building, with tiny paper trees and a square of blue tape for a pond. Kai came in, saw it, and sat down across from her. He studied the construction with the complete quiet attention he brought to everything. "That's the pond," Fern told him. "Like the one near Douglas Park, except I changed it so the water is cleaner." Kai nodded. He opened his sketchbook and began drawing the city. Fern watched him. "The trees are wrong," she said. "They should be taller." Kai made them taller. Fern added a third paper tree to her model. Neither of them spoke for 20 minutes. When Nola appeared at the kitchen entrance and saw the two of them, her younger sister's a quiet, unfamiliar boy, both absorbed in the same project. She didn't leave. She set her book on the counter. She sat at the end of the table. After a long pause she said, without looking at either of them, "The bridge support won't hold if there's any load on it. The span will twist." Fern looked at the elastic band suspension bridge over her model river. "It's tensioned." "Tensioned wrong. You need a second anchor point." Fern looked at her. "Can you show me?" For a moment Nola looked exactly like what she was. A 13-year-old girl who had spent 2 years learning not to offer anything, because offering meant risking, and risking meant the possibility of another kind of loss. Then she pulled her chair closer to the table. "Move the blue tape," she said. They worked for an hour and a half. Nola rebuilt the bridge with 2 anchor points and a counterbalance span. Kai drew each stage. Fern narrated the engineering decisions to no one in particular, in the focused ongoing monologue of a person who loves what she's talking about. Graham came home at 6:20. He stood in the kitchen doorway for a full minute before any of them noticed him. When Fern looked up, her face went through several things at once. Something like hope, something like defense against hope, which is its own kind of pain. Then she said, in a voice carefully stripped of everything, "We're fixing the bridge." Graham looked at the table, at the model, at Nola's hands, at the sketchbook open in front of Kai. He looked at Anwen, who stood at the stove with her back to him, not turning around, giving the moment room. He pulled out a chair. "Show me," he said. Nola hesitated. "You have a call at 7. Graham took out his phone and moved the call, then put the phone back in his pocket and sat down. Fern showed him the bridge. Nola explained the anchor points. He got 2 things wrong in a row, and Fern corrected him sharply and then stopped, astonished by her own directness. He did not mind being corrected. He looked like a man who had forgotten this was allowed. Kai drew all 4 of them. The table, the city with its new bridge, the window behind them with the October rain starting against the glass. Later Anwen served dinner. No one suggested eating in separate rooms. No one checked a phone. When Fern spilled water she said sorry so many times that Graham placed his hand flat on the table near hers and said quietly, "It's only water." She looked at his hand. She did not move hers away. It was not a healed family. It was a family that had paused briefly in the same room. But that was more than they had managed in over a year, and everyone at the table knew it. Even the ones who would not have said so out loud. 3 weeks later Lisette Arnaud arrived. She called from the airport, not from the front door. Graham took the call in his office and came out looking like a man still arranging information. He found Anwen in the kitchen and said simply, "Her mother is coming today. Keep things steady if you can." Anwen asked no questions. Lisette arrived in a taxi just after 3. She wore a coat Graham hadn't seen before and she had cut her hair since the last visit, which had been 19 months ago at Nola's end-of-year concert. Nola had played violin. Lisette had left before the reception. The girls heard the taxi from upstairs. Fern knew before anyone said anything. She came to the top of the stairs and stood very still. Her repaired bear under her arm, her face doing the thing it did when she was deciding whether to feel something. Nola's door stayed open 2 inches. Lisette came through the front door and saw Fern first. Her face softened in a way that was real and also 19 months too late. "Baby," she said. Fern said, "Hi Mum." Not Mama the way she used to say it at 6, at 7. Mum, the formal version. The version reserved for someone who is technically your mother and practically a visitor. Lisette came up the stairs and hugged her daughter. Fern let herself be hugged. She did not hug back. Her arms stayed at her sides, still holding the bear, not rigid exactly, just present without being open. It was a precise, terrible distinction, and Graham saw it from the bottom of the stairs and said nothing because there was nothing honest he could say. Lisette knocked on Nola's door. There was a long pause. Then the door opened to 4 inches and Nola's voice came through, flat and careful. "You didn't say you were coming. I wanted to surprise you. I don't like surprises." A pause, then Lisette said, "I know, I'm sorry," and it sounded true. It also sounded like the first time. Nola opened the door. For 2 days it seemed like it might be all right. Lisette took the girls for dinner on Fort Street. She attended Fern's school concert, the full concert, the reception included. She sat with Nola on the window seat in the upstairs hall and talked about Montreal, about the old parts of the city Nola had always wanted to see. On the third day she asked to speak with Graham privately. She sat across from him in the front room, and placed a document on the coffee table between them. It was a proposal from her solicitor. She wanted primary residency during the school year. The girls in Montreal from September to June, home to Victoria for summers. Graham read to the bottom of the last page. "When did you decide this?" he asked. "I've been thinking about it for a while." "You've been here 3 days." "I've been their mother for 13 years. Graham set the document down. He thought of many things he could say. What he said was, "Nola and Fern should hear this from you." He left the room because staying would have meant saying something that came from anger rather than truth. And he had learned, slowly, that these were not the same thing. He found Anwen in the kitchen. He sat down at the table without being asked to. Kai was there, drawing. Anwen put the kettle on. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Graham looked at the model city covering the side counter, 3 weeks of accumulated building, and thought about what it meant to build something alongside your children, instead of providing for them from a distance. "She wants to take them to Montreal," he said. Anwen set a cup in front of him. She sat down across from him. "For the school year," he said, "both of them." Anwen wrapped both hands around her own cup. "What do they want?" she asked. Graham looked at the question. "I don't know," he said. The honesty of it surprised him even as he said it. "I haven't asked them." "That might be where to start," she said. The next 2 weeks were the hardest Graham could recall. Nola didn't know what she wanted, which was worse than a refusal. She carried the question through the house visibly, like something heavy with an uncertain center of gravity. She came to Graham at 7 in the morning in the kitchen, and asked, "Does it matter what we want?" He said yes, so immediately that she looked startled. "Then I want to stay," she said, "but I want her to want me enough to ask." He understood that sentence so precisely it hurt. Fern told her mother over the phone that she wasn't going to Montreal. Lisette said she hadn't decided anything yet. Fern said with the flat certainty of a 9-year-old who has learned the shape of an ending, "I think you have." Graham heard this from the hallway. He stayed where he was and let the moment be what it was. The mediation was held in an office building on Douglas Street on a Tuesday morning when November came in off the straight and made the city feel small. Graham brought his solicitor, Lisette brought hers. There were no courtrooms, no dramatic confrontations. Just 2 people in a neutral room, both loving their children in ways that had been inadequate in different directions. The mediator asked Graham directly, "Mr. Whitmore, in your own words, what is the most significant change in your household over the past month?" Graham considered the question. Then he said, "I started having dinner at the table." He waited while the solicitors waited for more. "That's it," he said. "I started being present. I moved my phone out of the room. I asked questions and let the answers be longer than I was comfortable with." He paused. "I had confused providing for my daughters with parenting them. They are not the same thing." Lisette looked at him across the table. He looked back. Her solicitor had documentation about the household instability, the caregivers who had left, the school incidents, the reports. Graham's solicitor had different documentation, a notebook. It was Anwen's. She had set it on his desk the evening before without explanation. He had opened it and read every page twice, slowly in the quiet of the office he usually used to avoid his own house. Week 1 Tuesday. Fern placed the grocery list face down on the counter, returned it without comment, continued working. Thursday. Left juice on table, Fern drank it. Remained near the window approximately 4 minutes, longest she has stayed in the kitchen voluntarily. Week 2. Nola asked directly whether I intended to stay, did not promise, did not deflect. She sat in the kitchen that evening for the first time. Week 2 Friday. Kai left a drawing on Fern's place at the breakfast table. Fern kept it, came downstairs with her model project within 2 hours. First time the project has left her room. Week 3. Both girls at table with Kai unprompted. Father arrived, sat down, stayed 1 hour 40 minutes, no phone, asked questions, was corrected twice, accepted correction without defense. First time I have seen either girl look at him without looking away. Week 3 Friday. Family dinner. Fern spilled water. Father said it's only water. She did not apologize again. This is the first time. The mediator read the notebook the way Graham had, slowly noting the dates, the small increments, the absence of drama and presence of pattern. When Lisette's solicitor suggested the record of an invested employee could not be considered objective, the mediator nodded once and turned another page. Anwen had been asked to attend. She sat with her hands folded, her peacoat over the back of her chair. "Mrs. Parry," the mediator said, "you note here that you have no formal training in child psychology or family counseling." "That's correct," Anwen said. "What guided your approach with the girls?" Anwen was quiet for a moment. I've worked in houses where children were in pain, she said. And in my experience, the ones who do the most damage are usually the ones who've been left the most often. They aren't testing you to be cruel. They're testing to find out if you're going to be the next one to leave. She paused, so I didn't leave. The room held its quiet. And your son, the mediator asked. Kai's presence seemed significant in these notes. Anwen almost smiled. He just drew things, she said. He didn't have a plan. He was just himself, and that turned out to be enough. The decision was not dramatic. Mediations rarely are. Primary residency would remain in Victoria. Lizette would have structured extended visits, properly planned, properly prepared for. Nothing announced from an airport 3 hours in advance. A family therapist would be appointed. The girls would have a formal voice in any future review. Lizette did not contest it. She sat for a long time after the mediator finished. Then she said something Graham had not expected. She said, I didn't know Fern still has that bear. Her voice caught slightly. I mended it for her 4 times. She was so upset every time it tore. Graham looked at her. She still has it, he said. Lizette pressed her lips together. Tell her I'm glad. In the car on the way home, both girls sat in the back. Fern had Kai beside her. He had asked to ride with her, and they were looking through his sketchbook together, Fern pointing out her model in the drawings. Nola sat on the other side, headphones in but not playing anything. Graham knew the signs. She was listening to the car. At a red light on Yates Street, she said without removing the headphones. She's not a bad person. Graham waited. She's just not good at being here, Nola said. I know. Nola turned to look at him. In the gray November light her face was sharp and tired and very young. You used to be the same, she said. I know, he said. I'm trying to be different. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned toward the window. But she did not shift away from the armrest between their seats, and his arm was still resting against it, and neither of them moved. The house on Rockland Avenue did not transform. That is the truth about healing. It arrives in increments, so small you could miss them without someone writing them down. Graham made breakfast on Saturday mornings. He was not good at it. Fern corrected him with considerable specificity. He kept making breakfast anyway. Nola started coming down for it. Lizette visited at Christmas. It was not easy and it was not perfect, but both girls were at the door when she arrived and both of them let her hug them, and Fern's arms came up this time, briefly before she pulled back. That was not nothing. That was the kind of small thing that leads to something larger. Kai and Fern finished the model city together in January. It had grown to cover the full length of the kitchen counter and had to be photographed and carefully packed into boxes to make room for actual cooking. Nola designed the final bridge. She sent Kai home with a technical drawing she'd made of the span, in pencil, on graph paper, and said he could use it if he ever wanted to. He framed it and hung it in his room. Graham learned this months later and said nothing. Because some things are more important, held quietly than spoken aloud. Anwen stayed. She stayed past the trial period, past the difficult first months, past the legal proceedings and the hard Christmas and the harder spring. She came each weekday and left in the evenings, and the house she left behind was gradually, incrementally warmer. Not because she repaired anything dramatic, but because she didn't leave. And because she didn't leave, the girls began, slowly and unevenly, to believe that some people stayed. And because they began to believe it, Graham began to understand what that required of him. He had confused a well-maintained house with a home. He had confused paying for help with being present. He had confused a quiet household with a peaceful one. He understood now, with the clarity that comes from looking at something directly instead of from a professional distance, that his daughters had not been trying to destroy everything around them. They had been trying to find out whether something could be broken and still remain. Whether a person could know the worst of them and choose not to leave. Children who have been left do not always announce their grief in soft words. Sometimes they announce it with a grocery list turned face down, a bridge built with the wrong tension, a door open 2 inches and no more. But underneath every act of sabotage, the question is always the same. Am I worth staying for? The people who change lives are not always the loudest. Sometimes they are the ones who bring a glass of juice and leave it on the corner of the table. Who search for missing sponges without raising their voice. Who sit on a cold floor in a courthouse hallway and tell a 7-year-old that Benny knows where home is. And if you are someone who was once that child, the one asking that question into the silence of a house that was running smoothly but not warmly, the answer was always yes. It was always yes. It took the right people staying long enough for you to believe it.